Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. For this episode we're going to look at the pre-1980s output of Neil Young. Neil Young of course started his career in the mid-60s in Buffalo Springfield with Stephen Stills, and then the pair of them moved on to be in Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young with David Crosby from the Byrds and Graham Nash from the Hollies. Neil Young has made many great records all throughout his career, but I think it would be hard pressed to argue against the 70s being his most consistently strong period, and it's certainly the era that made him a superstar. So it's a good place for us to start. So let's crack into it. In 12th place from 1976, Long May You Run. This is actually only half a Neil Young record. He made it with Stephen Stills as the Stills Young Band. Stephen Stills songs are nice enough, but we're not here to review Stephen Stills. The 5 Neil Young songs are pretty good actually. There's Fountain Blue, there's Midnight on the Bay, and Long May You Run, the title track, which has become something of an anthem for Neil Young, reflecting his long and varied career. It's a good record. All the records on this list actually are very good. But it's an easy one to put in last place because it's only half a Neil Young record, really. Number 11 from 1969, his debut album, Neil Young. He just left Buffalo Springfield, was embarking on a solo career, but Neil himself doesn't like this record. The mix and the sound, and Neil is all about sound and mix, is not really very good at all. And that famous crunching guitar sound he became famous for, that's not here at all. But the album has some saving graces, not least the songs. You've got Emperor of Wyoming, The Old Laughing Lady, Here We Are in the Years, The Loner, which has become something of a Neil Young standard, and also I've Been Waiting for You, which is a great song, which was covered by the Pixies and even David Bowie, no less. But because of the sound, and actually because you can hear that this is an artist still finding his feet a little bit, as is so often with debut albums, it's still fairly low on the list. But it is a good record. The placing does it a disservice. Number 10 from 1977, American Stars and Bars. Now this is an album Neil made with Crazy Horse, his long-time backing band. This is an odd record because, as we'll find out, Neil had so many songs, was so prolific, he was always earmarking songs for other records that never got released. And a couple of records were Chrome Dreams and Homegrown. They were 2 albums that Neil was forming, but he ended up just cherry-picking songs from both of those albums, which were never released, and putting them on American Stars and Bars. Now, this has got some great songs on it. It's got Like a Hurricane, which is an absolute Neil Young standard, which he plays at almost every show. It's also got Saddle Up, The Palomino and Bite the Bullet. But it does have a kind of patchwork feel about it, this record, because it's all been songs from other places. I think that Will to Love is never going to make my top 100 Neil Young songs, let alone a list of my top 10 Neil Young songs. So there are some songs on here which could be regarded as filler, and a long filler at that. Number 9 from 1969, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. This is a brilliant record. I mean, you know, putting it at number 9 seems ridiculous, but that just shows you how good and consistent Neil Young was with all his subsequent records. This again was with Crazy Horse, with Danny Whitten on guitar, Ralph Molina on drums and Billy Talbot on bass, his long-time cohorts who he still occasionally plays with today. Again, the sound on this record isn't quite fully formed, and that apocalyptic Crazy Horse plod and grind isn't on this record at all. It's actually a much more lithe and gentle record for them. There are some absolutely brilliant songs. Cowgirl in the Sand, Down by the River, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. This was the record that put the marker down and people started thinking, okay, Neil Young could be a force to be reckoned with as a solo artist. It's a really good record, and again, placing it 9th does it a disservice in this list. Number 8 from 1974, On the Beach, Neil's 5th solo record. This was a record he made with a cast of many other musicians. It's a very bleak, desolate record. The musicians were all taking a lot of honey slides when they made this record, which was a kind of sort of honey and marijuana fried up concoction. So you can only imagine what effect that had on their playing and everything. And it does have a very downbeat, laconic feel to it. Ambulance blues, vampire blues, revolution blues. You get the idea of what's happening here. He ropes in Rick Danko and Levon Helm to play on Revolution blues, and they create an absolutely killer groove on that track. There's a lot of good songs on this record. Walk On is a lovely song. Motion Pictures for the Turnstiles. It's a somber, wasted vibe of a record, but one worth investigating, absolutely. Number 7 from 1973, Time Fades Away. Now, this is a really interesting record because, again, Neil was kind of tired and emotional at the period when he made this record, and he went on tour and decided to record some new songs. So he was playing these new songs live for the first time. So it's kind of a live album as well as a new record of songs. Again, Neil hates this record because he thinks the playing is terrible. And yes, it's out of tune, some of it. Some of the singing's out of tune, some of the playing is ragged. But I love that. I think that gives it such a human Neil feel. Neil is all about the feel in his music. And there's more feel in this record than many others. Probably for all the wrong reasons, but it still sounds great. And once again, the quality of the songs is brilliant. You've got LA, you've got Don't Be Denied, Love in Mind, which is one of Neil's most beautiful songs. He didn't release this on CD. In fact, he still hasn't released it on CD because he doesn't like it. So if you ever find a copy on vinyl, snap it up as soon as you can. It's a fantastic record. Number 6 from 1978, Comes a Time. I love this record. This is Neil at his most genteel and warm and acoustic. There's no spiky Neil here. There's no cynical Neil here. It's a mellow record, and it's got such beautiful songs. You just listen to the opening track, Going Back, with Nicolette Larson's beautiful harmonies, and she sings beautifully all throughout the record with backing vocals, and you get immediately the sense of what kind of record this is going to be. Crazy Horse pitch in on Lot of Love and Look Out for My Love, 2 of the best songs on the record. But it's a folk record, it's a country record. The title track is Comes a Time, is another Neil standard with some fabulous fiddle on it. So he's got generally his old hands playing with him on this record. Ben Keith, Jack Meacher, Tim Drummond, who were known as the Stray Gazers. Another band that Neil went back to over in his career. Number 5 from 1975, Tonight's the Night. This is a record that was recorded in 1973, but released 2 years later for various reasons. Much of it is a tribute record to Danny Whitten, the Crazy Horse guitarist, who died from a heroin overdose, as did Neil's roadie Bruce Berry, both of whom are name-checked in the title track, Tonight's the Night, which the album begins and ends with. Neil's grieving for Danny Whitten all throughout this record, and it's another one that has a very somber atmosphere. Mellow My Mind, Albuquerque, Tired Eyes. Again, these are weary, draggy songs. They're no less brilliant for it, don't get me wrong. But Neil is great at wrenching that kind of emotion and passion out of a song, and just a few chords and just a few sort of simple lolloping beats. He does it time and time again throughout his career. He's the master of it, in fact. Again, this is an utterly brilliant record. Just because it's not in number 1 doesn't mean it's not a fantastic record. It really, really is. And absolutely an essential Neil Young album if you're investigating his catalogue. At number 4 from 1979, Russ Never Sleeps. This is another one Neil took out on the road of new songs, a bit like Time Fades Away. He recorded these in San Francisco, and then he did do some overdubs on these ones later. The first half of Russ Never Sleeps is all acoustic, and the second half is all electric. And he played the album, he's got Crazy Horse playing with him on the album. By now, Frank Poncho Sampedro is in on guitar, replacing Danny Whitten, who died. The first half is incredibly powerful. It opens with My Hey Hey, which he closes the album with a fantastic electric version with the full band. But the first side has Pocahontas, Thrasher, Ride My Llama. These are amongst the absolute best Neil Young acoustic songs. The second side is fierce. It's got Sedan Delivery and the legendary Powderfinger on it. Again, an absolutely essential Neil Young album. And neither side is... You'd think that the acoustic side would be less powerful than the electric side, or the electric side less subtle than the acoustic side. And that's just not the case. Neil can wrench some incredible emotion and sounds from his acoustic guitar, and he can be incredibly expressive with his electric guitar playing as well. At number 3 from 1970, we've got After the Gold Rush. Now, this is the album that really started cementing Neil Young's reputation. He was fresh out of Crosby, Stills and Nash at this point. They just made Deja Vu, and you must remember Crosby, Stills and Nash were regarded as the American Beatles. Deja Vu was an enormous record. So this was akin to sort of like George Harrison moving on from the Beatles or something. Neil is he's got Niels Lofgren in on piano, bizarrely, and guitar to help him out with this record, and he plays much of it with Crazy Horse. It's full of fantastic songs. Southern Man, Don't Let It Bring You Down, the title track after the Goldrush, which is a Neil Young standard. This regularly makes the top 100 albums of all time lists. It was a top 10 in the UK and the US. I love it. There's not a bad song on here, really. Don't Let It Bring You Down is absolutely one of my favourite Neil Young songs of all time. I just happen to like albums number 1 and 2 in this list just that little bit more. And number 2, I'm going to put Harvest from 1972. Now, Harvest is probably the go-to Neil Young album, and it's the album that introduced me to Neil Young and many of my friends. When you listen to that intro, just the beat and the atmosphere and the harmonica of Out on the Weekend, you're entranced. It's such a world away from everything you hear on the radio these days that it just transports you back to a different place immediately. And the album just, there's no filler on this record at all. Every song is consistently strong and powerful. Needle and the Damage Done, Alabama, Words, Harvest, the title track. Old Man, another Neil Young standard. He plays with the Stray Gators, and they recorded it in a massive barn on his Broken Arrow ranch. And there's a lovely clip on YouTube of Neil Young in the field outside the barn as they're rehearsing, and he's shouting, "Give it more barn, give it more barn." And you get exactly what he means, because on this record you can hear every plank of wood that made that barn, and every bit of hay and every bit of dust on the floor. It's a dirty, woody record, and all the better for it. It's not a polished record like you hear these days, and that's where all its charm comes in. It has an absolute natural woody beauty. It was a huge album on both sides of the Atlantic, and by this time Neil Young was a real superstar, and he had a status that he seemed to spend the rest of the decade trying to lose. But number 1, and this is going to surprise a lot of people because it's not the obvious choice, but I have just always had a real passion for this record, and it's from 1975. It's Zuma, and Zuma is a record he made with Crazy Horse. It was the one part of the Ditch trilogy. It's known as the Ditch trilogy. He made Zuma, Tonight's the Night, and On the Beach. Now, those other 2 records are much, much more downbeat than this. I think Zuma has a focus to it. I think it has a strength to it that those other records don't have. And it also has a beautiful warmth to it, which I'll talk about in a minute. So this isn't an obvious choice, but I think this record encapsulates everything great about Neil Young in 40 minutes. You have these fantastic extended guitar workouts in Danger Bird and Cortez the Killer. Then you have these brilliant, short, sharp, funny, cynical songs like Drive Back, Stupid Girl, Don't Cry No Tears. And then you also have these incredibly beautiful, sweet acoustic songs, Pardon My Heart and the magnificent Through My Sails, on which he wrote Crosby, Stills and Nash to do backing vocals. And that's one of my favourite Neil Young songs. On a personal level, when I first started recording and multi-tracking music when I was a teenager, it was this record, the songs from this record, that I started taking apart and putting back together with my own playing to see if I could record and produce and arrange music. So I've always had that sort of personal investment in this record. But like I say, I think there's no filler on it at all, and I think it's his most focused Crazy Horse representation of his music and all the different things he brings to music and the way he expresses himself through his guitar playing, his songs, and his acoustic music. And it's a bit of a sort of undiscovered gem because people tend to go more for Harvest and After the Goldrush and those sort of records. But absolutely, I'm putting it at the top of my list. It may not be the greatest Neil Young album, but it's certainly my favourite. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that. That's our Neil Young pre-1980s rundown. If you don't agree with me, say so in the comments. Let's get some banter going. Keep it clean, please. We all just music fans here. And I will see you again very soon for some more rock records reviewed. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.